Welcome to the Tackling Tech podcast, powered by Dyknow. Join us as we tackle all things EdTech with insightful interviews, actionable tips, and strategies that you can implement in your school or district to make technology integration more effective. Whether you're a teacher, a tech coach, or a technology administrator, we're giving you an advantage in your role by sharing stories from people who are passionate about working with their peers and enhancing the learning experience with technology. Thanks for spending some time with us today. Now let's tackle some tech.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Tackling Tech, a podcast that shares stories to help you build better collaboration in K-12 schools, and a show that is dedicated to putting a voice to remote learning. I am Brett McGrath, Vice President of Marketing at Dyknow, and I am excited to share today's episode, and I'm also excited that we are in the middle of the Progressive Learning Conference. So if you're listening to this live on Tuesday when it normally drops, you will have already had a chance to check out Tara Martin's awesome keynote. Today, we have a great session on personalized learning with Jill Thompson. On Wednesday, all things STEM with the STEM guy, Chris Woods. So you know who he is, and he's the man dropping knowledge on STEM. Day 4, Thursday, flipped learning with Eric Geis, Kyle Nemus, and Nick Johnson. And then day 5, we're talking SEL and PBL breakout with George Valenzuela, who was on the podcast last week. So if you're listening to this the week of Progressive Learning Week, you can still go on Dyknow.com and register for the event. If you can't register, shoot me an email at bmcgrath@Dyknow.com. We'll make sure that you get involved and you have access to those sessions. It's going to be a ton of fun. We understand everyone's super busy right now, getting acclimated and back to school. So these sessions will be recorded and you'll have an opportunity to watch them at your own leisure. Definitely go follow us on Twitter at Tackling Tech Pod. Go follow us across all the social channels. Follow us at Dyknow. We are putting out more content than ever. It's been super awesome. I'm so thankful that our team is laser focused on producing content that's going to help you all out on a regular basis. And that conference is a big piece of content that they've been working on and organizing over the last month. So definitely go check it out. Go follow us across all of our social channels. We are really excited to be putting a voice to remote learning, progressive learning, and all things that matter right now. I'll tell you about things that matter. And that was my conversation with middle school principal Evan Robb. Evan has been just such a awesome guy to interact with over the last few weeks and getting to know him. And I got to tell you, this was one of my favorite conversations yet on Tackling Tech. And I think a reason for that is that because what his message and what he talks about is very relatable to me as a marketer. It's about taking risks and the learnings that come out of taking risks. And he talks about that from a business perspective, but most notably, he applies that to the world he lives and operates in, and that is K-12 education. I had so many notes after my conversation with him, and I think this is going to be one you're going to want to get the notepad out, and you're going to want to jot down some notes, and you'll also probably want to listen back to this because there's some hidden nuggets in there. I am going to shut up because I think this conversation is super important, and I want to kick it over to it. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this one. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Tackling Tech. I am really excited for this conversation. I am here with Evan Robb, who is a high school principal with 20 years of experience. He is a prolific author, consultant, speaker, you name it. I saw his TED Talk on 2 ways to get into the swimming pool, and it hit me from a couple different angles, and I really appreciated it because as a marketer and as a person in business, it really got me to think about the idea of taking risks and how that can translate back into K-12. I liked it so much, I sent it to my CEO. My CEO sent it to the rest of the company, and everybody offered really good feedback. And I said, hey, I'm talking to Evan on the podcast. You guys can all check out the conversation afterwards. So, Evan, excited to chop it up with you. How are you doing this afternoon?
I am doing great, and that was a very nice introduction. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your kind words, and excited to just have an opportunity to have a conversation today.
Yeah, I think first things first, I'm curious, you're a principal, leader of a school, going back to school at this time frame. How's that going for you? What sort of obstacles have you had to deal with, and maybe some learnings you have from, the spring semester?
That is that's a big question. So let's try to unpack that a little bit. It has, certainly been a challenging time. As you know, many schools all across the United States of America went into closure somewhere around the middle of March, and went into what is frequently called within the education world emergency remote learning. That was hard. That was really challenging. We didn't have a lot of time to prepare for that. So we did the best that we could. Very fortunate to have a community that's very understanding and was willing to be flexible with us as we found the best way to be able to make that work. But we learned a lot from that. Now, if you'd asked me back in April what I thought September was going to be like in April, I probably would have said that we would have been back fully with kids. But of course, things have continued on, and as have the challenges that I face and educators face all over the country. And my school currently is fully virtual. We had considered a hybrid model. Many schools are doing a hybrid model, but we're fully virtual right now. So a couple of the challenges that we faced have to do with access. Access to technology is a challenge. And if you're doing virtual learning, there will inevitably be people in a community that don't have access to Wi-Fi. So we continue to try to find creative ways to make that happen. And I can dive a little deeper later on if you'd like, but I will say that continues to pose a problem and a challenge. The other issues that we've dealt with, are again the same as many schools. Safety. Safety is an absolute priority. It's a priority for me as a principal to make sure that teachers that are in my building feel safe and that they are safe. So I've probably put more efforts into safety protocols than I ever have dreamed of prior to this time. But if you look at like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the basic level needs are important. People they don't feel safe in the building. They can't do what they need to do. Also been able to orchestrate a lot of really good quality, intentional professional development to help make sure that our team kind of shifted from what I would call emergency remote learning into much more intentional and thoughtful remote learning in order to best meet the needs of kids in our community. So you're putting a lot of effort into having some consistency and how learning management systems are organized. We use Google, so consistency in Google Classroom, lots of discussions about what good lessons look like, how to deliver them effectively and differentiate them effectively in a virtual environment, and also to continue their focus on equity, and that we're providing good opportunities for all kids, whether they can learn synchronously or asynchronously. So I guess to sum it up, what I would say is the challenges have been very, very large. And what I've had to do and what my team has had to do is fall back on the things that have helped make us successful over time and apply them to this really new and changing time. So things, and this would apply to your world too, things such as collaborating, communicating, making sure that we are creative, making sure that we're allowing ourselves to be innovative, making sure that we're a team, that we're supporting each other and helping each other. And all of those things, that have helped make us successful in the past, we believe can help make us successful, in the fall now under very unusual circumstances. Because at the end of the day, right now, even though I've had 29 years in education, this is my first year as an administrator leading remote learning. And so that poses lots of challenges, but challenges can be opportunities also.
Yeah.
It depends on your mindset.
No, there's a lot you said there that I definitely want to maybe dig into a little bit. And one of the things is just the topic of equity. And I think, across the board in all these conversations, access to technology, access to Wi-Fi, equity, remote learning, all of those things go hand in hand together. And it seems no matter if you're a school district, big or small across the country, that's something that's top of mind for you. What sort of, and you touched on this a little bit, but I'd like to unpack it now, right now, is just to talk about maybe what solutions have you come up with in your role, or has your district proposed to try to close the gap on equity to make sure everyone's kind of going to school from an even playing field in a virtual setting?
We've done a couple things. One of the things that we've done is we've purchased a fair amount of Khajiits to be able to create a hotspot for families who don't have Wi-Fi at their home. But we have found that one of the challenges with that particular device is there are some limitations if students want to use that device for live streaming. The device seems to work relatively good for downloading information, but not necessarily good if there's going to be an extensive amount of live streaming. So what we have worked on is to create a system where teachers put into a zip drive every Friday by 3:30 the learning activities that they'll be focusing on for the upcoming week. And we've also set up some internet cafes around our community and in our schools, and have some hotspots outside of schools where parents can download information. So that's kind of what we're trying right now. We have had discussions, as have many schools, about packets and creating packets of information, but that poses challenges also for them to get to families and for them to get back to the building. So right now our focus is on using getting information into zip drives and making sure that we have some parallelism between what kids could download if they were asynchronous on a Friday afternoon for the upcoming week, and what kids will experience as they move the week ahead. Some of the inherent problems with that are it is a little bit challenging or a lot challenging, depending on the content area, to provide the differentiation that's needed, especially if you need to plan your lessons a week in advance. So basically, the remote learning forces us and many other school divisions to do some things that are a little counterintuitive to what we would normally do if everything was normal. So let me just kind of make that really simple. Good teaching is about knowing where your kids are, knowing what they're learning, and then making adjustments so they can become successful. It's very hard to predict what everyone is going to know a week ahead. Some kids can be accelerated, some kids need some additional support, other kids can do that fine. But when you need to plan out a weekend ahead, that becomes very challenging. So we continue to work collaboratively on some ways to better understand how to do that. But just it is simply a challenge and something that we continue to work on.
Yeah, and the collaboration component I know is critical. And you mentioned communication, and I think just in this era, everyone's using technology. Communication channels are endless. You talked about that from a staff perspective, focusing on collaboration and communication. But how important is that collaboration and communication outward to the families, and so they know what's going on and they know what they can expect? How are you working through that or thinking about that regularly?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it is important. And what happens sometimes, and I've seen this happen in other school divisions, and I've felt it at times too, especially during the emergency remote learning time of last spring, where if communication is not organized and at times centralized, it can get scattered and messages can be communicated that are different with no bad intentions. I'll give you a really simple example. So let's say that a school division is saying that they're going to communicate asynchronous learning activities through a zip drive that parents can download. But if that's not communicated centrally, a school may communicate to families that they're going to do packets, and inadvertently they could be doing something different than the direction or what other schools are doing. So you want to try to move as much as possible in sync with communication. I think communication needs to be in smaller chunks to families. A lot of places we're sending out these 100-page documents that can be a little bit overwhelming to read through. So I think smaller chunks of information is important, and I think over-communicating is always better than under-communicating during this time. The other thing to think about is, how do you want that communication to occur? Many school divisions have email. They have systems within their email that they can send emails to the all the families that are in their school division. And we have that, and many places do. But we also explore social media as a way to connect with our families. A lot of our families are on Facebook. So we have a Facebook page that we can put information there. We have Twitter feeds. We use Instagram. And sometimes we use a telephone also. But really the key is that the information is in smaller chunks, that it is frequent, that there's a desire to over communicate versus under communicate, and everyone's communicating the same message. And I guess I would also add the website in the school division is a great way to communicate to families, as long as the information is easy to find on the website. Because what happens sometimes is stuff gets put under different headers, and unless you're really good at searching for something, you might not find it. So a lot of school divisions have gone to kind of recreating the front page of their website with key links to information that families can quickly see and access.
I love that answer and response, and it is keeping a consistent message throughout, meeting these families where they're at, social media, and putting the information there. That really tugs at my heartstrings as a marketer. And part of the reason why I wanted to chat with you is just your idea in your TED Talk about risk taking, because I think that is such an important thing for across K-12 business in general, is not having a fear around taking risks. And just in my role, and what I like to do is, you don't know until you try, and it's okay to fail, because when you fail, you typically will have something to learn from that you can apply when you're moving on to the next project, task, or whatever it is. So I'm curious from your end, just risk taking and your history of risk taking in K-12 and why you value it so much.
I think that risk-taking is the only way that you're going to bring innovation and creativity into the workplace. Education, but I guess many other businesses too. I think there's way too much imitation and not enough innovation. So the question is how do you create an environment that risk-taking and innovation are valued? And you give an example of your work experience and your philosophy on it. But what you would probably agree to is that if your supervisor really got mad at people or gave people bad evaluations when they tried something new and it didn't go well, you probably wouldn't be that willing to try something new. So we have to take a look, organizationally, whether it's a business or a school, about what is the communication from the leaders within the organization to promote it or to inhibit it. And what I would say is that it works best when people who work in the organization see the leader taking risks and they hear the leader speak about it also. It doesn't work as well if someone is speaking about taking risks and that it's okay, but the people never see them do it. Now, it works worse when they don't talk about taking risks at all and no one sees them do it, and then it either doesn't happen at all or it happens in pockets. So the way for it to happen is people, a lot of this comes back to relationships and trust and some foundational things that are needed in the culture of an organization or the culture of a school in order for those things to occur. When an environment is such that people feel comfortable to do that, I think you're going to get the best out of people. But again, the question to always come back to is the leader of the organization will either, through their words and actions, encourage that to occur, or they will inhibit it. But what I would say is that the only way any organization is going to get really good is that needs to be something that is embedded in the organization. But a lot of that starts at the top. I would say that it is an interesting thing in education, because risk-taking, although it sounds interesting, it sounds engaging, it sounds like something that someone might want to do, some people are not comfortable with risk-taking. In fact, some people prefer just to kind of hit on the straight and narrow. And then that kind of begets the other conversation of how do you encourage people to do that? And then when they do that, how are you supporting that? Are your words encouraging them to do more? Or are your words or actions inhibiting them from trying to do that again because it didn't go well? Now, I would say within the school example, you want really good parallelism between what does the principal do and say, what do teachers do and say, and how does that impact into the classroom? Because just as much as I would want teachers to be creative and innovative and take risks, I would want them to encourage students to do the same. But at the student level, students will be, sometimes they're not comfortable to do that because they don't want to fail. And then sometimes your most able kids are not comfortable to do it because they're worried they're not going to make an A. And their goal sometimes, a lot of kids, especially kids that are more academic in middle schools particularly, they want to make a high grade. So they're more concerned about the pathway to make the high grade versus the risk taking and the experimentation that could potentially lead them to a grade that wouldn't be as good.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's all about cultivating the culture around risk taking, setting examples to let everyone from the top down know that it's okay to take risks. I'm curious, just it sounds like this is something that's just natural to you as a school leader. Do you have a specific example that you have displayed as taking a risk that maybe had a positive impact on the rest of the school that kind of set the tone and let people know that risk-taking's cool. This is something we should do because there's going to be ideas that come out of it. Do you have a specific example that you can talk about?
Yeah, I can give you an example. Yeah, and I'll give you an example that kind of that at least speaks to something having to do with technology. So the typical way that many schools explore bringing additional technologies into the building are it is mandated from the central office, or it is the principal who decides that, yes, everyone's going to use this particular piece of technology in the building. That's about compliance, right? And people will comply typically. People's likelihood to comply is often related to how much they need the job. So if someone needs a job to pay for their house and to put food on the plate, unfortunately, they're more likely to comply than someone who may be working in the organization who won the lottery and is just there because they enjoy being there. So I wanted to demonstrate and take a really different route with bringing some technology into our building. So our staff had looked at some different platforms that we were interested in, particularly interested in Nearpod, and the place that Nearpod could have in our school. I think we also looked at Pear Deck also. But I realized that I have a staff member who is actually a counselor who's a really good negotiator. I have an ITRT in my building who is just super tech savvy, and have a couple other staff members that are real go-getters and are interested in just doing some things that are really outside of the box. So I had a meeting with them and I said, look, I think this might be something that's good for our building. We have this amount of money. To the one teacher, I know you're a really good negotiator. So I want you to reach out to the company and see if we can negotiate something that really works well for us financially in order to bring this into the building. And then just kind of let me know how that goes. So that's the first step, which is I am giving someone who I would typically not give permission to have a leadership role, but not only have a leadership role, but have a leadership role outside of what they would normally do. So that team worked together. That particular staff member led the team, negotiated a really good deal. Then we wanted to kind of talk about how do we make this part of our school. So of course, the easiest way is the way I would never recommend, which is everyone's going to do this. It's part of your evaluation. I can get compliance that way, but I won't necessarily get people committed to doing it. So we took a different route and had our ITRT guy really offer a lot of training to staff, made it really invitational, started focusing in on people who were enthusiastic about this and started seeding it there. And then you build the excitement and the chatter about it, and suddenly it grows, but it grows from the bottom up versus the top down. And then there's an opportunity, and this extends the culture of in this case, of a school culture. I don't know if my word came through, where that becomes part of our story. And story is the oldest way to communicate. And organizations should always hold on to stories that give examples of the culture that you want to promote. So this becomes a story that we can tell, a story about banding together some staff members who have interesting skills, although they were outside of what they were typically hired for, and let them have a leadership role and let them grow and seed something, negotiate something. And then my role is simply to support it and tell them how proud I am and get really excited when I see good examples of it around the building. So it's a very different way to think about doing something, and it absolutely involves risk-taking because they have to be willing to do something that they don't normally do. But it also involves, empowerment and being able to let people assume leadership roles in different kind of ways versus the scalar way that an organization is typically structured, where the principal makes all those decisions.
I love that story, and I love the fact that you called out stories, and that's something we talk a lot about as a marketing team, about just how technology's commoditized. Everyone's got their features and functionality, but it's everyone does the same thing. It should be about the story we tell to the market, because people don't remember features and functionality. People remember stories. So like, I'm a big advocate of that. And my follow-up question to that, based on what you just responded, it's almost like I think it might need to be inverted, but my question was going to be based from your talk was, what can K-12 learn from business? But it sounds like based on that response, I might ask you, what can business learn from K-12? Because that approach and strategy and purchasing a piece of technology and empowering, all levels to be a part of that decision is very, very powerful. So I'm just curious on your take. I know you've talked a lot about the intersection between K-12 and business. So however you want to take it, I'll let you respond to it.
Yeah, I think before I go with that, I think I'll say something that certainly supports what you just said. And this does relate to business too. So in teaching, and if I was to ask you to think about a teacher who had a really big impact on you when you were under 11 years old. So right now your mind and anyone who's listening is going to go back to someone, like you're going to remember someone. And then if I say, what do you remember about the class that makes you recall that person? It will not be that person taught you how to diagram sentences, and it will not be that person told, you took multiple choice math tests in that class and did well. It's going to be because that person believed in you. That person saw something in you that may not have been there. And so your connections over time tend to be emotional connections. Emotional connections are relationships. And so with marketing works very much the same, where it is the relationship is the difference between sometimes something being very successful or not, or sometimes something being ridiculously successful that shouldn't be. And so I'll give you an example of that, and then we'll move it more to business. But I'm going to date you here because this is before your time, but anyone could look this up. So there was a guy in the mid-70s who marketed a rock, and it was called a pet rock. And so the premise of the pet rock is this guy had this little river rock in a little box, and through the way that he marketed it, people wanted to buy the rock. Well, it's not that much different than a rock in your driveway, but it became very, very popular because people made an emotional connection to the product. They wanted the product. It had status to it, or it was part of the culture of that time. So he was able to make millions of dollars off of selling a rock in a box. And so, when you think about that in terms of school, how do you make connections with your community? It's typically not, that you have a teacher that teaches kids how to use a graphing calculator really well. It's going to be more about the emotional connections that the teachers and the school has with the community. And then so you take that into the business world, and something that we can learn from the business world is the business world typically changes much quicker than education. And so in my TEDx talk, I think you probably have it more fresh than I do, and I appreciate you watching it. But I think that I spoke to, this business example where if you Google what does a factory look like in 1912, and what does a factory look like in 2020, and they look radically different because there are needs in business to change very quickly with the times. Because if you don't do that, you go out of business. Now, education doesn't have the same driver of profit and being competitive within a market. And so at times that has slowed down the changes that need to occur in education. And so again, if you look at a school from 1912, you look at a school in 2021, they're not going to look radically different. You're going to see in many cases kids sitting in rows and a teacher in front of the classroom. So I think one thing that we can continue to learn from business is that that change can be a good thing. What things need to occur within the organization for change to occur? But I think sometimes where the argument goes a little off is schools can be like businesses, but remember that a lot of businesses fail, and we don't want schools to fail. So I would say schools, there are things from the best businesses that schools can absolutely learn from. And I'll give you one other example. I don't want to talk too long, but I love the topic. And so think about Apple. So why is it when Apple releases a new iPhone that people are lined up, at least in normal world, by a Best Buy, sometimes 48 hours before they can get into the store to get the phone? When you can have an Android phone that can have many of the same functionalities, maybe even better, arguably. But I don't see people ever line up at a Best Buy 2 days before to buy an Android phone. So then the question is, why is that? It's because of the emotional connections that people have with Apple. Because when you see that brand, you make an association to it. You associate that brand with innovation, with creativity, with something that you want to be a part of. And schools can learn from that and create that same buzz within their communities, because when schools do that, then parents want to move to a community. Then people, and then as it happens over time, it can have an impact on local business. It can have an impact on real estate valuations, all those things. People want to live by a good school. People don't necessarily want to live by a school that's not good. In fact, they want to run away from that. So just all those different kind of things to think about. But what I would say is, yes, we can absolutely learn from K-12. But yeah, I do think there's things that for business, but I think there's things that businesses can certainly learn from well-run schools.
Yeah, I love that answer. Thinking about the iPhone when you're describing it, it immediately took me back to one of the best ad campaigns of all time, and the Apple Be Different campaign. And I think like now, just in business and in K-12, like that punchline, that slogan probably is more applicable than ever, where it's be different, like take those risks, combat status quo, because that's where real ideas are going to happen. And I talk with educators regularly, and the more people are thinking outside the box and thinking about things differently, the more cool innovation is happening on the back end. So that's where mine went. Maybe we'll close out with this. I'm curious, just thinking about just everyone within a school, regardless of role. You talked about the Nearpod example and evaluating technology during this period where people are in the physical classroom, people are in hybrid, people are all virtual. Regardless of role, what is your recommendation, or how do you think educators can become better leaders right now?
I think it's important to remember that some of the really basic things that help leadership always work. And some of them we have to really make sure that we're doing them in the remote environment. What I'm going to always come back to is relationships with human communication. Many teachers feel very isolated. I know that in my building, teachers are sitting in the room in front of their computer screen, and they're talking to kids all by themselves. There's no one in the room. They need people to come by and say hi. And, so as much as I talk about big things, about culture, about differentiation, about equity, access, people like it when someone says hello to them and smiles, and empathizes with things that are challenging for them. So what I always kind of say is, like, you want to go back to some foundational things that are very, very important under any circumstances. I mean, yes, there's some real differences between leadership, when you have 500 kids in a building and when you have 50 teachers and no kids in the building, because I have to constantly reach out to community, reach out to families, find different ways to do that. But I also need to know that I need to take care of my team, and they need to feel safe, and they need to feel heard, and they need to know that I'm highly invested in them and in their success. So I guess my simple answer is go back to some of the really foundational things that are important. And I think the other piece is realize that some of the pace that you may want to initiate change as a leader, you might need to slow that down a little bit right now and realize that where's the maximum point for people, because people need to feel successful at what they're doing. And having too many initiatives right now is probably not a good thing. In fact, I would say within my school, we've really narrowed it down to just a few key things that we're going to focus on, which is a little bit different than how we've done things in the past. But I realize their jobs are a lot different now too, and I need to be sensitive to that.
That's really good. Simplification is important too. I took note of that. Hopefully you all had your notepads out and were taking notes. I learned a ton from talking with Evan. Evan, you've got a lot of books you've written. You're online. Where can people find you? Where can people read your content?
Thank you very much. I am on Twitter at Robb Principal. If someone is interested in Twitter, I try to stay relatively active within the Twitterverse. Also have a blog called the Robb Review blog, which is mostly focused on literacy. If you're someone who's interested in reading, building a culture of reading and literacy, I write on the blog and have a lot of guest people participate on the blog too. You can look me up on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and also at my website, robbcommunications.com.
You're all over the internet, man. You're everywhere.
Well, when your kids grow up and you have a little more time in the evening, you can put time into these things. But when my kids were younger, I certainly didn't have time to do all that.
Sure. Well, I had a blast talking with you. I know the audience will definitely find value of it. Best of luck getting going in this school year, and we'll talk to you real soon.
I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. Make sure you go back, look up his TED Talk. That is one that we've watched over and over again and is super inspiring. Hopefully you can pull some inspiration around how to be a better leader, how to take risks, how to empower others at your school or district. That one was loads of fun for me. Make sure you hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Leave us a review if you think we're doing a good job. Take care of yourself and others around you, and best of luck getting back to school.